Very good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Hello. How's everybody enjoying their sea day so far? Having fun, yeah? Another nice day for you all out there. Well, thank you for taking a break from the beautiful weather to come on in and join us for this really enlightening presentation, all of course with our partnership with Discovery. Now we're going to be getting our presenter down here to do the talk. Don't worry, it won't be me. They don't let me near the bridge. I don't know any of this information. But he's going to be out here. He's going to tell you about how hard his job is and how difficult it is to pilot the Majestic Princess. I'll let you in on a secret. It's on autopilot, all right? Please welcome out our second officer. It's Michael.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, very good. Well, navigation at sea, so going to be, hopefully by the end of this talk you'll know enough that you can do my job. It's as simple as that. This lecture we're going to talk through a few different points. Initially looking at the facts and figures. We'll talk a little bit about the more details about the ship, how fast she goes, the consumption, how much fresh water she produces. Then we look at the bridge team, our training we do, the sort of work that we get up to. Then we have a closer look at the actual bridge and navigational equipment, so I'll actually talk you through each of the different pieces of equipment on the bridge, give you a virtual tour of the bridge so you can see where we work. Have a little look under the waterline so you can see what's actually moving us forward at the moment. And at the end there we'll do some questions and answers, so save up your questions and we'll hopefully get round them all at the end of this talk. So starting with the Majestic Princess herself, keel laid in July 2015, so she's still relatively new to the fleet compared to some of the other ships now. Entered service in March of 2017. She was built for the China market. She used to be slightly different livery design. It was set up for leaving Shanghai and 3-day cruises, hence some of the different features around the ship. Built in Fincantieri in Italy, that's where most of our ships have been built. We've got a few others that were built in France, and of course the Diamond and Sapphire that were built in Nagasaki in Japan. Total construction bill of $600 million, slightly more than my monthly salary, but it's still quite a lot. Comparably, it's still quite an expensive ship to build. Maximum capacity of 4,450 passengers, 1,350 crew, so 5,800 total. Quite a large number. At the moment, we're nowhere near that. We're only around the 3,200 mark, and that's passengers and crew in total. So we're nearly 50% capacity at present. And of course, registered in London, in the UK, that's where we're flagged through. You'll see the British Red Ensign flowing from the topmast and usually from the stern when we're in port. That's where we follow all of our regulations and guidelines from, and where we follow all of our safety requirements from. Further details, length overall 330 metres long, so largest ships in the fleet this class, 1,083 feet, so quite a length. A beam of 38.4 metres, so that's from the promenade deck on deck 7 one side to the other side, and then the extreme width, which is from the sea walk, which I'm sure you've all had a walk on to the glass and look down, that's 47.2 metres from one side to the other. Our summer draft is 8.55 metres, so summer draft is what we're pulling underneath the water, so that's what's actually underneath the water. Then we see our air draft is 60 metres, so we've got 8 metres below the water and 60 metres above the water. So to me, that's a little bit top heavy. A gross tonnage of 144,000 tonnes, I should say, and a net tonnage of 121,000 tonnes. The difference between those two, the gross tonnage, is the overall weight of the whole ship. So that's everything on the ship, the steel, everything inside the ship, equals 144,000 tonnes. The net tonnage is the overall usable space. So this space that we're in at the moment is usable space. It's space that we can use for, which they deem in maritime terms, cargo. So we are technically cargo on board, and the usable space is 121,000 tonnes. So there's about 20,000 tonnes of space that isn't used on board for various reasons. It could be because the engines take up that space or things like that. And a displacement of 69,000, nearly 70,000 tonnes. So displacement, imagine getting into the bath, if it's full to the brim, as you get into the bath, all the water that's pushed out is displaced, and that's what we're doing. We're displacing nearly 70,000 tonnes of water. And there we go, a tonnage is a measure of volume. So when we talk about 144,000 tonnes, we're talking about 144,000 metre cubed of volume. Some facts and figures about the engines. I'm no engineer, I'll tell you that now, so if you start asking me questions about how the engines run, I cannot tell you, but we just know they work. Engine arrangement, we have 4 engines on board, 2 big and 2 small. The 2 big engines, they're all Wärtsilä engines. The 2 big engines have 14 cylinders, and our 2 smaller engines have 12 cylinders. So 2 cylinder difference isn't very much. On other class of ships, they have much smaller engines, so we're very highly powered. Seeing there that the big engines make 16.8 megawatts of power. I did a little quick conversion this morning. 16.8 megawatts is 22,000 horsepower, and 22,000 horsepower, you need to buy about 15 Bugatti Chirons to do that, and I think a Bugatti Chiron costs about 2.9 million, so that's a lot of horsepower we have sitting down below us here. Fuel capacity, we've got heavy fuel oil and gas oil. The heavy fuel oil is the thick sludgy stuff at the bottom of the refraction process, real slow burning. We've got to heat that up before we use it, and we can carry nearly 3.1 million litres of that on board. And then the marine gas oil, that's the lighter stuff, a little bit more like aviation fuel, similar to what you burn on land, and we have 815 tons of that. Average consumption of a diesel generator is around 2.7 to 2.3 tons an hour, so that's working out of about 2,000 or so litres an hour. Freshwater production, we can produce 2,500 tons of water a day. We have two different systems to produce fresh water on board. The first one is traditional evaporator. So as you can imagine, we suck the seawater into the ship. As we heat it up and boil it, we evaporate off all the nasties, the salt, all that sort of thing. And then as it condensates, it's pure, clean water. Our second system is reverse osmosis. So if we've got any biologists in the room, you hear of osmosis. It's a cell membrane, and that moves a liquid of one salinity to another. We do the exact same process in reverse, and we end up with clean, fresh water. Our fresh water on board is so clean that we then have to put minerals back into it, because it's not drinkable in the state it's in, so we have to put back in those minerals that you're so used to on land. Our maximum service speed is 22 knots. So we work in knots, which is nautical miles per hour, and 1 knot, or 1 nautical mile, is about 1.15 land miles. So that's the rough conversion. And again, another little bit of knowledge this morning. I did the current US fuel costs for your regular gas is about $3.26 at present. If you tried to fill up the ship with regular gas, it would cost you about 2.7 million if you did it at the gas station today. So it's quite a big bill. Finally, lifeboats. Of course, you've seen the lifeboats. We use them in Cabo for tendering. Ashore, that's actually one of the tenders there, number 14. We have 11 lifeboats and 5 tenders. So the lifeboats are slightly different from the tenders. The lifeboats hold 305 people. The biggest lifeboats in our whole fleet. They're beautiful boats to work in. And our tenders hold 242 at capacity. When we were using them as tenders, we only fill about 150 to 200 people in them. So you can imagine we've got to fit 40 extra people in those, so there's all these hidden seats that you didn't see. Two rescue boats, so therefore worst case scenario of rescuing somebody from the water or for towing different items. We've got 2 of them and they hold 6 people each. And then we have our marine evacuation system. You've seen the 2 big white boxes on the aft of the ship on deck 7. That's our marine evacuation system. So this is mainly used for crew, and you can see we've got 2 stations. They hold about 600 people each. And what happens is we release them, and this big life raft folds over the ship's side and lands in the water and inflates. And they're made up of 4 life rafts each, and we load them up with the majority of the crew. Additionally, we've got 9 spare of them as well for another 500 people. So in total, as you can see at the bottom there, we have capacity for 125% of the total people on board. Which came about from, of course, Titanic, when they first launched her with limited lifeboats. The SOLAS requirements, so the safety of life at sea requirements, came out, and they stipulated we had to carry a minimum plus the 25% extra. Now, the bridge team itself, I mentioned I'm second officer on board, so I'm the only second officer on board. We're part of the bridge team. There's only 9 officers, and then we have our 6 crew that work with us, and we are the bridge team. We're not a very big team. We also have the deck boys and security team as part of our deck department, but actually the bridge team as a whole is quite small. As you can see, captain at the top, he's of course the master, the man in charge, the staff captain, second in command, and also the department head, so he's my big boss generally. Following that, we've got the safety officer, so he's the statutory safety officer. They have to have him sailing on board. He's the man in charge of all the drills, training, exercises, everything that trains the crew up to the level of the standard that you see when we did our crew drill. Following that, from first officer down, we are watchkeeping officers. So we do split shifts watchkeeping. The first officer, senior second, and myself as second officer, we're the senior watchkeepers. So for 8 hours a day, we're on the bridge and we take charge of the ship on behalf of the captain. So during that period, so those 8 hours a day, we make the decision on navigation, safety, environment, and all those aspects on behalf of the captain. Along with us, we have our 3 third officers. They're our junior officers. They're there to support us. We usually have a cadet on board. The cadet just left a few weeks ago, so we're cadetless at the moment. And then we have our AB helmsmen and quartermasters. So they are our lookouts and actually the men steering the ship by hand. And we've got 2 of them on each of the watches too. Bridge team manning, there's a picture of my team actually. The bridge is manned 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year, whether we're in port, at sea, at anchor, wherever we were. Even during the operational pause we did for the past year, we still had people on that bridge. We're still fully manned. Normal watches, there's 6 watches, of course split into 2 different groups. You've got the 12 to 4 group, 4 to 8 and 8 to 12. So the 8 to 12 is the watch I cover, so I do from 8 in the morning till 12 on the bridge, and then I come back at 8 at night till midnight on the bridge, and I have extra duty in between. Each team, as it says there, made up of 2 officers and 2 ABs or quartermasters. So that's my team pictured there, or a nice selfie that we did. Now, climbing the career ladder. I started this job when I was 18. I left school and came straight to Princess. So my very first trip away, I flew out to Los Angeles and joined the Star Princess, and I was just newly 18, so it was a little bit scary. Starting as deck cadet, that's where we start. So the deck cadet training lasts for around 3 years, 3.5 years. Once you've done both on-board and ashore training, because we do a bachelor's degree at the same time, we then finish our final exam, and we then join as a 3rd officer. 3rd officer, 1 stripe roll, and we have an Officer of the Watch Unlimited license. So our licenses mean that we could sail on any vessel in the world. It doesn't have to be cruise ships, but we've chosen to live and work on cruise ships. After about another 2.5 years, we then go back to college again, and we do our next license, which is the Chief Officer's license, the Chief Mate's license. Again, that's what I have at the moment, Chief Mate's Unlimited, and that is a license again that lasts worldwide and can be on any type of ship. The final step, and the license we all aim for, is the Master Mariner license, the Master's Unlimited. So this means that we can be captain on any ship in the world. The whole process to getting these licenses, we have to do sea time, so we have to be on ship, we have to be working and spending time in navigation. So as you can see here, a rough time scale starting out. Usually we get our masters within 10 years of starting as cadet. I've got 2 months left and I'll be going back to college myself, so I'll just be around the 9-year mark when I go back to do my masters. And from that point onwards, it's about career progression, so staying in rank, working your way through the different positions and good appraisals. On a standard cargo ship, I could be captain within 10 years. It could be a small bulker, it could be something ashore. On a cruise ship, of course, as you can imagine, you don't want a 35-year-old as your captain. So they have a little bit more experience, a bit longer at sea, and we're looking at least 20+ years before we'll reach the final heights of captain. Actual education that we follow is a very broad-ranged topics, very broad-ranged view of learning. I think everybody thinks that all we do is just sit on the bridge and get you from point A to point B, but there's a lot more to the job than just that. Of course, navigation is a key point, very important to what we do, both celestial and terrestrial navigation. So that means we're looking at the land and at the stars. We still do take errors of the stars and use the sun and the moon, as they traditionally did for the past few hundred years, few thousand years. Other things we cover, of course, sea survival, very important. We need to know how to survive if we do abandon ship. Grand thing is, this is our biggest and best lifeboat. If we can stay on here, we will, but of course we have to prepare for the worst case scenario that we have to abandon to something smaller. We look at environmental protection, very important nowadays, a bit of a taboo topic in some respects, but the environment is very important of everything we do. It leads to most of the places in the world we go to, so we do like to make sure we protect them. There's international regulations in place that say where we discharge certain items and how we do that, and we have to make sure we follow that very strictly. Security is another key item. The security team that you met at the gangway comes under our responsibility. We have overall responsibility for the security of the ship to make sure nobody's in that shouldn't be in and nobody gets out that shouldn't be out as well. GMDSS, that's a Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. What that equates to is communication. So communication, of course, key. We have to be able to speak to other people around the world and in ports and other ships that we go past. So we have various systems that you'll see later on in this talk that will guide us through and how we can speak to other people. And finally, we've got first aid, incident response and first aid. Sorry, firefighting and incident response and first aid. We can't call 911 and expect the fire service to turn up to the ship. So we are the firefighters, we are the teams in charge of the fire teams. So we are the ones that will lead the fire teams into an emergency situation, command and control, and work with them to carry out search and rescue, to put out fires and close-up spaces. Included in that is first aid, and we actually do a medical certificate that is enough for basic triage and a form of nurse work. Do not put me in a hospital, it wouldn't be a good idea. But likewise, I'm sure you don't want to turn up to the medical centre and see me standing there. So that's why we have doctors on board instead. But if we were on a cargo ship and you were ill, you would come and see me as second officer. So imagine how scary that would be. Once we do finish our training as a cadet, the training doesn't finish. So we do continued training. It's about continuous professional development. Part of that is Princess and the other Carnival Corporation. We have built our own training centre, so C-Smart, as you can see, the Centre for Simulator Maritime Training. This new centre, which is pictured in the bottom of the screen there, was opened about 5 years ago now, and it's a purpose-built centre that Princess started. The big tall building on the right-hand side is actually our hotel, so we've got a full on-site hotel, nice rooms, food, everything's included, and then the training centre next to that is our main working building. The two pictures you see, the top right-hand side is a diagram of what we're actually working in. We have full mission simulators that are wide as this room, just the same or similar width to the cruise ships that we actually work on. And it's fully immersive. We have bridge wings, we have centre, as you can see in that picture on the left-hand side, and it does feel like you're back on board. And at least once a year we have to attend this training centre and follow through the training and make sure that we're keeping up with new standards, current regulations and safety requirements. So this training centre we go to at least once a year. Sadly at the moment we haven't been able to because of all this current crisis, but it's all been online training instead. I kind of missed my little holiday out to Holland. But now, little video to start us off here. See if this works.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät, das Überlebensradar.
Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
I put that video in because I love it. It does hit on the point. Multinational bridge teams. Our bridge team is not just one nationality. We have about 4 different nationalities at the moment. We've got Croatian, English, Italian. So we all work together as well with our AVs that are Indonesian and Filipino. So it's a big ranging team. So we all have to be able to communicate correctly. And part of that, of course, is making sure we follow through basic English principles. English is the international maritime language. So that is what is expected to be spoken throughout the world. Now, this is the bridge. This location up on deck 14 all the way forward, you've probably glanced up and seen the bridge wing from when you've walked past the ship, but this is actually the layout of the bridge from our technical manual. So I spend at least 8 hours of my day in the centre, in this area here. So that's where we generally spend majority of our time. The centre is our main navigational area, that's where we con the ship from, so drive the ship from. And of course you can see either wing on the far extremes, and then behind that we've got our offices, which you'll actually see later on. We've got our safety centre and chart room offices. So this is the layout of where we spend our day. Now, let's start. I always try and do this bit of what questions I'm usually asked. So we'll start off very simply with a view from the bridge. So this is what it looks like from the centre. The very small chair in the middle, that's where our helmsman sits and actually steers the ship from. You've got the other conning positions, and you can see to either wing in either direction. So that gives you an idea of my office in some respects. First question, how do we move the ship forwards? Always a question that's asked, how do we actually move? So very simply, how do we make the ship move is we use the telegraphs. As you can see in the pictures, this is our telegraphs. Telegraphs originally used to be a system, I'm sure you've all seen Titanic, where you'd ring the bells and the engineers would respond, and it was a telegraph system, so you'd have to a response to your action. Now it's all electronic, it's all much more modern technology now. We move these small levers that are about this big, and that will actually send a control to our propulsion electric motors to actually move us forward or into reverse. We don't work like a conventional vehicle in some respects. On your, say, your car or your lawnmower, as soon as you start the engine and engage the gear, you will move forward. We don't have that. Our engines are continually running. They run at a continuous speed, very high RPM actually. But what we actually use is propulsion electric motors. So if you can imagine a bit like a very large vacuum motor, just two of them, and what they are actually doing as an electric motor moves us forward and aft. The reason we use these, trying to stop a big engine and put it into reverse is very, very difficult, whereas an electric motor, you have unlimited movements. It's a lot more forgiving to what we need to do. And a ship this big, in some of the ports we go into, we need a bit more options for our manoeuvring. So you can see we've got one for each side, of course, two propulsion electric motors, two propellers, and we can control them independently if we do need to. From that, of course, how do we steer the ship? Of course, we can move her ahead, we can move her astern, but we have to be able to move her in the right direction as well, or we would have been probably in mid-Pacific by now. We have a few different options. Over on the far left-hand side, we have our little wheel. So this is where the helmsman actually stands. Everyone imagines the big wooden wheel, Captain Jack Sparrow or whatever, turning the wheel. We don't have such a thing. We have this tiny little wheel about the same size as a game controller, and this is actually how we steer the ship. We give a rudder order or a rate of turn to actually turn the ship in the direction we want. Rudder order, very basic. If we want to go to port, we say port 10. The helmsman puts the rudder to port 10. Rudder will turn and we turn. A rate of turn is a little bit more of a cruise ship thing. So you can imagine something that's as top heavy as this, with 8 meters under the water, 60 above. If we turn too quickly, she'll lean over. So we try and reduce that lean as much as we can. So it's all very controlled what we do. And we actually work out our turning radius, a turning circle, prior to actually doing a turn. So then we give it in a degree per minute alteration. So we will tell our helmsman we would like a 5-degree rate of turn. So he will actually alter at 5 degrees per minute on a rate of turn. So you can imagine that's a very slow turn, but a very controlled turn. So very different from a cargo ship that would just put the wheel hard over and let her go. These two other options, we've got the tiller in the middle. So this is a little tiller drive. You can imagine, I say tiller, I'm sure some of your boat owners here, the tiller on your sailing boat or your drive, very similar to that. There's another medium for steering. And finally, we have our little mini wheels, we call them. We call them mini wheels because it's a mini wheel. And this is what we have on the wing and in the center as another method. So in occasions when we don't feel like using the helmsman, we can actually steer ourselves. When we're going into port, we may choose to, so we'll have the con and we'll adjust the rudders as we choose from the center. Other ways of steering, so it's not just hand steering all the time. I've included the picture on the right hand side to show you our steering motor. This is one of 4 steering motors, rotary vane steering. So it's hydraulically pressurized and will turn by our signal from the bridge. The picture on the left hand side is our other method of steering, what we use majority of the time. This is our autopilot system, or NACOS system, navigation and command system. It's a very clever autopilot. It's got 3 different modes that we can use. It's got heading mode, course mode and track mode. So the first one, heading mode, very simply, we tell the ship which way to point and she will always point that direction and head along that line. It's the very simple system. That's the one that's as basic as anything. It doesn't take into consideration any other factors, so of course your wind, your current, things like that. Middle one, we have course mode. So course mode, it looks at what the ship is actually doing through the water. So we might be pointing one direction, but we could actually be sailing in another direction. So it takes into consideration this, will actually follow the course that she's doing along that track. And finally, we have track mode. This is the cleverest one of the lot. It follows the red dotted line that we've drawn on the chart to take us to our next port, and she will follow that line the whole time. All we have to do is monitor and make sure that she does stick to that line and accept the alteration when it comes. And that small little joystick you see in the very top of that left-hand picture, that is actually only about this size in real life, about 2 inches, and that's what we're driving the ship with at the moment. 1 click to port, 1 click to starboard, and she alters a degree. So this 330 meter long ship, and all we're using is 2 inches. How do we move the ship sideways? Of course, so we've came into port, we've left port, usually very tight ports on a ship this size, and we have to be able to maneuver the ship alongside the dock, move it parallel. Most cases we don't use tugs, we don't need to use any assistance, we have our own system for this. And this is actually done through the thruster panel. The thrusters themselves, you'll see a bit later on in the under the waterline pictures. The thrusters, we have 3 forward and 3 aft, and what they equate to are small propellers that face from port to starboard. And what they do is they turn at very high speed continually, and as we move these little joysticks, they actually change the pitch of the propeller. So they're flat when they first start turning, and as we adjust the pitch, that will then move water either to port or to starboard, which inversely pushes us the other way. So this is how we can turn in a sixpence, so we can turn with our pivot point dead in the middle on our circle and also move on and off the berth. So a very useful piece of equipment. I was talking about propellers. Of course, we've got two propellers, two inward turning propellers. Fixed pitch, which means that the blades are stuck, they're not variable, they cannot be adjusted. Inward turning, which means that they turn into each other. Very economical. Oh, if you go to the Star Princess, they're outward turnings, they turn the other way. Not as economical, but very good for manoeuvring. She's got slightly less powered thrusters, so she needs something else to help her. We have good powered thrusters, so we don't need that. The propellers are 5.7 metre in diameter and weigh nearly 23 tonnes. So that's a lot of brass back there. And I worked out the weight. Combined weight of the two propellers is the same as a Boeing 737-800, which I'm sure some of you have flown on to get here. So you can imagine the sheer weight of these solid masses of metal. The rudders as well, you can see the two spade rudders we have there. Total area used to move the ship is around 30 metres squared or 320 feet squared. So you can see they're directly astern off the propellers, and as we turn them, they push the water in another direction, which then turns us as we go. Those funny little lines, or the funny little square blocks along the rudders themselves, they're sacrificial anodes. Steel is very prone to rusting, as we know. As soon as a bit of salt water gets on a lump of steel, it'll start to go rusty and orange. Not very good for a steel ship. So what we do is we stick these zinc anodes onto the side of the ship, and these sacrifice themselves and rot to protect the actual steel work of it themselves. And they're changed usually in dry docks every 3 to 5 years. And there's a person for scale of a 5.7 metre blade. Thrusters, I mentioned the thrusters, 3 bow, 3 stern thrusters. You see there, they're about 10,000 horsepower total, forward and aft. And you can see the thruster tunnels themselves. So this is the aft section on the right hand side, and of course the bow section on the forward. 3 thrusters, and of course you can just see the propellers. They're not the best photos, I know, but you can just see the blades that are moving the water either direction there. And on the far left hand side there, we've got the bulbous bow. You might have seen the little symbol on the ship's side when you went past. Most ships in the world have these now. It's a lump that sticks out from the bow. The reason for this, again, is fuel efficiency and economy. A standard vessel with no bulbous bow, as it moves through the water, it creates a wave, a basic sine wave. What we do is, by adding this bulbous bow, we create a secondary wave that will be opposite to the main wave of the vessel. And as they meet up, they cancel each other out, smooths it out, which means we have less friction through the water, better hydrodynamics, which moves us easier through the water. And you can see how shiny that bulb is. That's actually a special type of silicon paint that's used on the hull, again, which stops barnacles and other creatures growing on it and keeps a nice steady flow of water over us to give us as much economic speed as possible. Now back into the bridge, I mentioned the Bridgeman Consoles earlier on. This is the Bridgeman Console on the starboard side, actually, identical on the port side. This is where your cruise starts and finishes. This is where the captain, staff captain, myself, whoever is conning on arrival or departure into the port will come and stand to do the final manoeuvre. So it has identical controls to the centre. So we've got our propulsion, we've got our thrusters, we've got our steering, as well as you can see CCTV cameras, our chart, our radar. So final manoeuvre, usually when we're just coming alongside, we move all the controls out to the one wing and we'll manoeuvre the ship from that position. The reason we do that is because we have a brilliant view down the side of the ship. On some ships the view's a bit better. On here everything sticks out a little bit further, so this is why we have CCTV cameras, so we can't see all the way aft without using CCTV. On the other classes of ship you can see down the side very well. How do we see small boats at night? This is a very good question. You might have seen when we arrived into Cabo San Lucas the other day, there was just boats everywhere. Everybody out fishing. They all leave at the same time and they all get in our way. Through the day it's fine, we can see them, but at night it's a little bit more difficult. We have to display certain lights at night so everybody can see us, and of course everybody's balcony lights, the movie theatre, the show is on, there's lots of brightness. On a little fishing boat, not so much. They might have their phone as a light. I've seen that before where they take their phone as we go into Los Angeles. Very simply, electronic charts work the exact same as paper charts. Yellow is land, blue or white is water. So generally we try and avoid the yellow. The red line running up the middle of the screen, that is our track. So that's what we've planned. the first officer on board, he's our navigator. So he plans the routes, and then myself and the other officer checks them, signs off on them, then they're approved by the captain, and that will be the route that we follow for the duration from point A to point B. So Puerto Vallarta to Los Angeles in this case. Paper charts used to be very simple. You used to have to go and pull out books and other information to find further details, but electronic charts are much further ahead of the game nowadays. So we can actually interrogate this chart, a bit like Google Maps. You can click on it and find out more information. The same sort of thing can happen here. So we can actually find out information about the pilots, about the lights, what we would expect, the currents, the tides, all those things are now integrated into the one system. So really when we say an integrated bridge system and an integrated navigation system, we do really mean everything's in one. When we arrive tomorrow morning, we also then lay our radar on top of this. So we have a radar image plastered on top of this so we can see the small boats and make sure the land matches up to what we should expect to see. And that's our ECTIS, it's called, which is Electronic Chart Display and Information System. Now, how do we know where the ship is? It sounds a silly question. I do get asked this quite a lot. How do you know where we are? I said, GPS knows where we are. Very much like your GPS in your car that knows when you're getting to a speed limit and you're going too fast. Same thing happens here, that we have about 4 different GPSs we use to actually monitor the ship's position. Back in the day, I say back in the day, 2 years ago I was down in South America, we were plotting on paper charts because there was no electronic charts, and we were doing regular fixing. Our electronic charts we did have actually had us going over the land half the time. So we had to plot it onto Chilean and Argentinian charts. So we were doing fixes every 6 minutes based on radar objects and line of sight. Very tiring. We've thankfully moved away from that general way of navigation into our electronic systems, but with the GPS it means that we have continued an accurate position. So we know where we are all the time. 3 different forms of GPS that we actually use on board. We have standard GPS, which of course is your American satellites as you're used to. We have DGPS, which is differential GPS. So differential works by using a land-based signal. So of course remember GPS is satellite-based. We're adding in a 4th vector or a 4th line. That's a time-stamped signal from shoreside. These are stations all along the coast. With that extra line that cuts through, that reduces our accuracy much more. So we usually, with standard GPS, we're talking about 50 to 100 meters of accuracy. So that's about 1/3 of the ship. When we go to differential GPS, we're talking about 25 meter accuracy. So it cuts it down nearly by half. This system on the far side here, on the right hand side, this is actually an image of the satellites we were monitoring this morning. So you can see we had 8 GPS satellites, 5 GLONASS satellites, and 6 Galileo satellites. Galileo being the new satellite system by the Europeans. Monitoring all those satellites together, we use this ocean star system called Fugro, which brings our accuracy down to 10 centimeters. So when we're coming alongside tomorrow morning in LA, we have our position planned for every door, every gangway, pre-arranged, and we have it saved in the system. And when we're coming up to our final position, we're working in centimeters. So a 330 meter long ship, and we're talking 10 centimeters to get us into our final position. So it shows how accurate and how much we know where we are. How do we know where the ship is heading? I mentioned earlier on our electronic autopilot system will follow a heading, it will follow a course, it will follow our track. It still needs to know which way she's pointing. 2 different methods for doing this. The one on the left hand side is probably the most familiar to everyone. It's our magnetic compass. This magnetic compass, it works just like any other magnetic compass, like the compass you have if you go out hiking. It works based on the magnetic field around the whole globe. As you move, of course, it's pointing north all the time, as your standard magnets would do, and as you alter, it will still follow north. So that's still used on board. It's always going to work, unless something dramatically happens, which we hope doesn't. Second system is our gyroscopic compasses. So I'm sure some of you here are probably old enough that you had gyroscopes as toys as you were children. And they work on the exact same principles. When you spin them up to high speed, if you try to nudge them over, they adjust themselves back up. We have 2 white boxes sitting up on the bridge that have gyros running in them continually. They run at very high speed, and what they do is they have a fixed azimuth or a fixed point in space they work to. So you can imagine we have the globe, then there's a net around the globe, which is your celestial sphere. So that's where all your stars are. What they've arranged is they've fixed a point in space. It might not be a star, it could just be a blank point in space, and that gyros will always point to that point in space. What happens is, as we turn, the gyro is always trying to correct itself and force itself back to that position. As it does that, a clever bit of computer technology works out the force that's used to push that gyro in the other direction, and that will be our heading that's fed into the system. Both of these do have inherent errors. Like anything, computer systems do have their little faults. We have to check these errors at least every 4 hours. So what we do is we take azimuth or an amplitude of the sun, the stars, the moon, whatever that might be. It could be a shore-based point, and we'll then do a bit of calculation, a bit of maths, and work out what the error of the compass is. So usually our gyroscopic compass here can have between 0 to 0.4 degree of a inaccuracy. So 0.4 of a degree is very, very small. You know, we're talking tiny, tiny amounts. So this is why we continually check these to make sure that they're running to their optimum. How do we know how fast the ship is traveling? I mentioned earlier on that we work in knots, so nautical miles per hour. We use a few different methods to do this. Of course, the basic one, you recognize this picture on our right-hand side here, is our GPS feed. So very much like your car, distance speed calculation, it works on the how far you've gone over a certain period of time. It then tells you your speed. What we have on the left-hand side is the Doppler Log, or a DO log as we call it. I'm sure you've all been standing in the street when an ambulance or a police car has gone past, and the sound changes, doesn't it? As the siren goes, or a Formula 1 car goes as it goes past you. That's the Doppler Principle. That's a basic principle of sound. So as sound goes past a fixed point, the sound wave changes, and we use that exact same principle for our speed. What we do is we bounce a signal off the seabed. As that the feed is sent back to us, it uses the change in frequency from that wave that's been sent out to work out how far away it is. So as it goes, okay, it's gone this far in this period of time, I know the speed. Once we go too deep for that to be bouncing off the seabed, it actually uses the salinity of the water. Everywhere in the world there's a point where the salinity of the water is a fixed depth. Usually about 300 meters. It gets really salty below that, and it bounces the same signal off the salty layer on the under the water and uses that for that same principle. Talking of how much is underneath us, how do we know what's underneath us? Very important. This was alongside the other day. We had 3.2 meters underneath us, so that's only around 11 meters from seawater down to the seabed. We use echo sounders, very simple. Similar principle to our Doppler log here, but all we're doing is sending a signal directly below us, and as that bounces and sends an echo back, echo sounder. As that bounces back, it works out how long it took for the echo to return to us, and that's what gives us our depth below the keel. As you can see, so that's 3.2 below transducer, it says, so below the keel. Remember I said earlier on we've got a draft of 8.5 meters, so this is the 3 meters below that. Now, relatively smooth day today. Nobody spilled their gin and tonic this morning with breakfast. We're okay. The ship's been very steady. We can roll, of course we are a ship, we're very much like a cork in water. As the sea moves us around, we move too. We feel a slight motion at the moment. Not very much. Very steady ship to work with, but we do have systems in place to smooth out the journey as much as possible. These are based on our stabilizers. So you can see this a long 7.3 meter long fin that sticks out the ship's side. We've got two of them, one either side, and what they do is they're gyroscopically controlled, and as one adjusts one direction, one adjusts the other, and they pretty much push the vessel, a bit like a turtle with its fins, and moves the vessel and tries to upright her. The control panel on the right is what we use on the bridge to extend them and house them. So they extend like that, and then they'll start to operate. They say on average these reduce the roll of the ship by about 80%. So you can imagine when you think you're in a little dance down the corridor, that's at least 80% less than it could actually be. So that's our stabilizers. Now, GMDSS, I mentioned, how do we communicate to other people? Our Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. This is a picture of our GMDSS console. This is further back at the back of the bridge, and this is where we communicate to everyone in the world. Our main communication system, of course, is through Vhf Radio. You might have a handheld VHF to speak to other boat users if you've got a boat at home. Same principle here, but just a little bit bigger and a little bit more powerful. This is how we speak to the pilots, the port, the local authorities. We pick up the radio and can speak to them verbally. We also have MFHF radios, that's medium frequency and high frequency. VHF is very high frequency, so that runs very, very high up there. Medium frequency and high frequency are much lower waves, but they run much further. So the MFHF, not really used around here, but we're so close to land. It is designed for if you were in the middle of the Pacific or down in the Antarctic, we could still speak to somebody a few thousand miles away if we needed to. Then on the far left-hand side, we've got those two screens there, and that's our Satsi system, so a satellite-based system. This usually sends us weather and port information. Any, well, as we get closer up to California, after San Diego, military exercises, you might be lucky enough to see some guns and aircraft flying past us tonight. They usually start doing military exercises midweek, and you see the tracer bullets go through the water. Well clear, well clear. And all this information comes through the satellite system, and it comes off as printouts, a bit like a wartime, you know, rip it off, we can read it, and it's saved in the system here too. So very useful, and this works all over the world. So usually they cover areas. We're in an area at the moment which covers from Hawaii to this coastline, so much covers all the way up to Alaska as well. And that's our main systems we use to speak to other people. What other equipment is kept on the bridge? I've pulled out two main equipment here that we use, which is the Valve Marine and Safety Management Control System, the SMCS. SMCS is on the left, and the Valve Marine's on the right. We'll start with SMCS. This is the one we use most. As I say, my main job, of course, for those 8 hours a day is the responsibility of the navigation of the vessel, but also the safety of the vessel. We do that through our SMCS, Safety Management Control System. I'm sure you've been in your cabin, you've noticed the white boxes all around the ship, the detectors that you see, the smoke detectors in your cabins. They are throughout the ship. If you look at that screen, you can see all these little dots. It's very difficult to see, but all those little dots are individual smoke detectors. Anytime one of them is activated, an alarm comes to the bridge. So you might have had a phone call when you walk out your shower and it's too steamy, it sets it off, we get an alarm and we have to investigate this. It's called a control system, which we can control pretty much the whole vessel from here. All the fire screen doors to close up the whole area. We can secure fire sections so the fire doesn't spread. We can check the watertight integrity of the ship. We can close the watertight doors from there. We can switch on ventilation, extraction systems, lighting. It's all controlled through that main control panel there. So it's our main safety systems, and it's our monitoring system. The screen on the right is the Valve Marine. This is more what the engineers use. We have very limited access upstairs in case we start an engine. They don't want us starting engines randomly. So we have limited access. This is one of the main pages. It's the healing system. Again, imagine, as I said, we've got 8 meters under the water, 60 meters above the water. As a strong wind blows from one side, it will push us over, as any righting lever would do. What we have to be able to do is correct this. So what we actually do is use these tanks forward and aft. There's 2 forward, 2 aft, and with a valve in the middle. What we do is we pump water from one side of the ship to the other to actually upright the ship. So use an internal factor, an internal force to push the ship back upright. That's why you can see different volumes. You've got 300 tons of water on one side and 170 tons of water on the other. So probably there was a strong wind on the starboard side when the photo was taken. So we adjust as necessary. What happens in emergency? So I mentioned our safety is a big part of what we do. Command and control is our main priority. So when it comes to a real emergency situation, as you saw during the drill, we all have duties. My duty is to prepare all the lifeboats, so we've got somewhere to go. The rest of the team work in our safety centre here. So this is where we have very much a Star Trek kind of situation room. We've got our main control system that you can see. We can monitor stability, we can do mustering. As you check into your muster station, it pings up directly to the bridge. We know exactly where everyone is for an emergency situation. And all this is controlled, so all these seats are filled. We've got people everywhere checking different things and monitoring. We work as one team to monitor and protect the safety of the ship as we go. What does the bridge look like at night? The picture on the left-hand side is what everybody thinks it looks like. Something out of Star Trek, everything lit up beautifully. But reality is, night vision doesn't work very well when you've got bright screens and lights all over you. So what we do is we actually dim the bridge down to the picture on the right. If anybody walks up to the bridge at night, they walk on and stop because they just can't see anything. We're night owls, we can see in the dark very well. And this is how we usually have the bridge, in total darkness. The reason we do this is to improve our night vision. All the screens are dimmed to minimum. Anything that doesn't need to be on is switched off. No lights, because we're looking ahead. So some of you might have forward balconies, or the forward end of the ship balconies. We have control of those lights to stop them reflecting too far ahead. So we need to be able to see these small little targets that I showed you on that slide on the radar. Oh, another video to finish.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Sir, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is the lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello, Captain. I think he's gone. Fair enough.
Any excuse to use that video as well. The reason I mentioned this one, of course, is our collision avoidance. We do try and avoid colliding with other things. We have the International Collision Regulations, so COL regs they're called. And these, again, were set up, they're internationally known. Everyone should follow them. And it tells us how we meet other vessels and how we pass other vessels. And distances, lights, all these sorts of things. Doesn't mean everyone follows the rules, so we have to sometimes take action in different ways. But that's just a funny example of not following the rules. So that comes to the end of the talk. Thank you very much for coming along. This is our chance. If you've got any questions, we have a microphone going to be coming around and I'll take some questions.
Okay, when you bring a pilot onto the ship in order to assist in docking, does the pilot steer the ship or do you guys still steer the ship?
Usually the pilot's an advisor. So in some ports in the world, it's mandatory that they have to take con of the ship. They'll never take charge of the ship. The charge of the ship stays with the captain. But usually as local experts, we take them on because they'll be able to tell us more about the port. We know the ships better though. So what we generally try and do is say, well, you give us information, we'll get the ship where it needs to go. So they have much better knowledge than us. At the end of the day, I've been to probably 400 different ports around the world. So I know them all a little bit, but not as well as they do. Such good detail.
All right, how much do the anchors weigh? How many do we have and how often do we use them?
We've got 3 anchors. One of them's actually spare. I think each anchor weighs about 15 tons. And using them, beginning of this year, we spent 3 weeks at a time at anchor in La Paz in Mexico when there was only 130 of us on board here. We spent 3 weeks at a time at anchor, which is very rare. Usually a cruise ship will spend a day like we saw in Cabo, then we'll pick up the anchor and go again.
How many people are on the bridge at any given time? Like you've got a bridge team, but how many actually work?
At the moment, there's only 4. So at the moment we have our senior second officer, our third officer, and our 2 helmsmen. And that's usually the standard setup. When then we go into port, we increase that, so the captain and staff captain come up too, so there's then 6 of us, and maybe the pilot, so 7 maximum.
Okay, we had a question about waste management. How does that work?
Yes, so waste management. Of course, recycling on board is key. We have the environmental officer that looks after our waste management as a whole. What we focus on, of course, is the grey water and black water. So grey water is what comes from the galleys and what comes from the showers. So as you have a shower, it becomes grey water. The black water is what comes from the toilets. So there's 2 very different types of water there, and both have international regulations in place of where we can actually discharge them, where and how much at a time. So there's very strict requirements of it has to pass through certain meshes, it has to be able to not be seen in the water, we've got to go certain speeds, certain distances off land or off a certain archipelagic area, and all these factors are taken into consideration through MARPOL, which is the Marine Pollution Acts that we follow. These are international regulations.
What about man overboard? How does that work?
We had a scare of man overboard nearly a month and a half ago, wasn't it? Yes, man overboard is, I think, a terrifying thing. They say usually 9 out of 10 people do not survive man overboard. So it's horrible statistics. Reporting, of course, has to come straight to the bridge. We are the ones that get the report, get that phone call. It's not a nice phone call to get. When they do, we then have a team of people. It's about 20 of us. All the bridge team, the deck guys, medics, they come with us too. We actually launch both rescue boats. We stop the ship, we turn around, we get the searchlights out, we get everybody looking for people. We then have to muster everyone on the ship to make sure everyone's here as well, that nobody else is missing. It's a scary time.
Okay, our question on the front is, when we were leaving Los Angeles, there was apparently a ship that sort of started coming towards the ship, and then the pilot chased them off. Are they going to get reported? Is that a thing?
depends who they were. I wasn't actually on the bridge for the end of departure in Los Angeles, but if they're being too boisterous and naughty, the pilot will take note of them and speak to the local authorities, because the port official still manages the port there. I've got her running around in circles.
Why is the ship flagged in London versus Hamilton?
Very good question. Partly because of people like me, being British. We keep so many of the ships flagged in the UK, both from an officer standpoint and from a regulation standpoint. Bermuda is a subsidiary of the UK, so the UK will release a new legislation, a new law, and 3 days later Bermuda will do the exact same thing. So by keeping them flagged in the UK is the highest standard of flag when it comes to safety for most of the world. And for our licenses, I'm a UK flagged officer, and it is deemed as one of the top flags in the world. There is other countries too, as we know. So keeping this high standard by flagging it in this country maintains that level of training and inspection on board.
Okay, we had a question over here, which was, how long have we been building such top-heavy ships for? And then your other question over here was, when do you sleep? Like, what is your average day?
Sleep?
Sleep, what is that? Welcome to cruise
What was the first question again, sorry?
How long have we been building such top-heavy ships for?
Decades and decades. Cruise ships have always been very top-heavy. The only ships that work correctly are cargo ships, because they have a lot under the water. Cruise ships work with this metacentric height. There's this invisible distance between the centre of buoyancy and the centre of gravity. We have to keep them apart, because if they start to cross over, we flip over. So we have 2.5 meters that we keep extra to keep this ship up the right way, which means she corrects herself. Then when do I sleep? That's a very good question. I usually sleep from midnight. I sleep from midnight till about 6:30 in the morning. And then my usual work pattern is 8 till 12, and then I come back and do from 12:30 to about 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Alright. Do you get a day off?
Yes.
Day off.
Days off is when we go home.
Yeah. We got time for one more question.
Yeah.
Yes, my love. Okay, the question is, when you finish with your schooling, how long do you have to go until you get first mate, like first officer?
From where I am now, I'll get my license within the next year, but actually to get the first officer rank, I'm probably looking at least another year away. With all the situation worldwide, promotions stopped, so we've been a bit delayed. But from that point, it's just about time and career progression there. So.
Okay, I'll do last question up here.
We have time.
So what size vessel has the right of way?
It doesn't matter what size, it matters what type.
What type of vessel?
We're power-driven, so power-driven vessels will give way to other power-driven vessels depending on where they meet each other. So if we meet each other head-on, we both have a right, we both have an obligation to alter away from each other. We don't play chicken. No, wait, we don't do that. But if we're coming from different directions, if we have a vessel on our starboard side, then we have to give way. Likewise, if we meet a sailing vessel, we have to give way. Sailing vessel has priority. And there's various types of vessels that work in that similar pretext. So it doesn't matter about size, it matters about where you meet each other. All right, that's it. Well, thank you very much for coming along. I appreciate your time.